All right, it's a good Arguing Agile today because, boy, do I have an article to hopefully get under your skin, Om.
It certainly will do that, I'm sure.
All right, here's the article. Ex-Google CEO Eric Schmidt on why in-office work is better. I don't know how you build great management, end quote, virtually. So it's like a paraphrase inside of a quote. This article is recent. This is April 5th, 2022. So this is not like something written a million years ago.
Right.
Although unlike that picture.
Unlike the picture. Picture goes back a long time. Wow, that's, I'm just taking a deep breath.
Yeah. All right, so jumping right into the top of the article, I guess after we've all been working remotely for a couple of years, Eric Schmidt wanted to give his 2 cents about it. So I think the deal for this article was that Google employees are headed back to the office on some kind of hybrid model. I really should investigate deeper on what that means. But Google is such a large business. It's such a huge mega business that I don't even know, like, what are you talking about? Every Google employee across the entire globe? I don't think so.
No, it isn't. You're right. Absolutely. It says on the article that they just kicked off their hybrid model with a select set of employees.
Yeah.
And out comes our friend Eric Schmidt. Ex-Google, he doesn't mention bunch of other companies, including ex-Novell Networks, which is really where he made his mark all those dinosaur years ago.
Hey, Novell. Oh, man.
I really don't know what motivates somebody like him to come out and just simply, I'll say it, try to be relevant in today's world, by making these kinds of comments, because he doesn't really, in the article, he doesn't really say why. He's simply saying he doesn't know how you build a good management model remotely. That just means he maybe doesn't know how. There are companies that have been operating remotely before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. There are companies certainly since the pandemic or have gone remote and have not gone back. There are companies that have started to do what Google started to do. You have to remember the scale of things. There aren't that many companies that are the size of Google. So they're bringing some people back in. Mm-hmm. We need to look at that and say, well, are the people they're bringing back in those people that really need to be brought back in because their work is most effective if they're face-to-face?
Right.
There are many, many companies out there that are doing a bang-up job of creating this new or have created a new management model and doing fantastic. They've conquered this idea that you have to be face-to-face. Now, having said that, I will say this. The best way to work is face-to-face because you can see, for obvious reasons, right? I'm sure our viewers and listeners know this. Mm-hmm. You can not only listen to the other person, but you can watch their body language. So there's more ways to communicate than just one or two different channels. And you can avail yourself to all of those if you're face-to-face. I understand that.
Sure.
But that said, we're no longer in 2000, right? We're 2022. We have tools at our disposal that still allow you to do those things, albeit in a slightly pared down fashion. Mm-hmm. So yes, for the most part, attendees on your calls, on your meetings, appear as boxes on a call, right? Much like the Brady Bunch, I guess. But that's enough. That's enough for you to see because for the most part, not always, but for the most part, the expressions you're observing, the body language you're observing is facial. Mm-hmm. And perhaps upper body, I should say, not just facial. Because you can see when somebody's checked out and they sit like this, things like that. You still have that. I think that what's critical is how people are tapping into those things, by being aware of it, right? Yeah. As opposed to saying, well, we can't meet face-to-face, it's no good, we got to go back in person.
Yeah, you just bring up a great, interesting point, a very relevant point, which is I can think of all the places that I've ever been where you could read people's body language, but the domineering manager in the room, they could care less if you're checked out or not. They're still just going to stampede over everyone's good points online or in person. If I have my choice to get stampeded over, I'd rather get stampeded over from the comfort of my couch or my office chair at home. Like I don't need to go in the office for that. And I'm like, you could be like, wow, Brian, but they're not talking about that. We're talking about they're Google and everything is great and they're in their ivory tower and the world is awesome and they all ride unicorns to work.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. So the steamrollers will do what the steamrollers will do, whether you're remote or not. That's absolutely true. I actually think that I'm going to argue the other side of it, which is in person, you always get those people that are in the room but say nothing, right?
Right.
You could do that remotely as well. But
Sure.
with remote usage, what you have is you have ways. If you're creative, you can devise ways in which to bring them into the conversation. I'll just touch on a couple of examples, right? So first of all, when you see people's names in a meeting online, pick on the first person and say, well, so what do you think, Mary or Fred?
Yeah.
And when they've had their input, just say, well, Fred or Mary, you get to now pass the baton to the next person. Yeah. It's innocuous enough where they don't realize what they're doing, right? But you're really bringing people in. The other thing you could do is you could say, okay, those people that are these steamrollers, you can ask them politely at the beginning of the call to say, look, everybody's input is important, right? But we want to hear from everyone. So and that includes you, right? And I will get to you, but it might not be until towards the end of the call, if that's okay with you, right? And then I'd focus on those people that are more introverted or that they don't offer much typically, right? Ask them to come in more. And then at the end of the meeting or towards the end of the meeting, you can go back and engage the other people that are always overbearing, right? Yeah. So you have ways and means that you can make this work for you. But, coming back to the article, Schmidt doesn't say why. He simply says, how do you build this culture? Yeah. To me, that sounds like, well, he doesn't know how to build it, right?
No, that's like, it sounds like get off my lawn is what it sounds like to me. Here, he
says he's a traditionalist.
We're only looking at the headlines. So the article reads, after more than 2 years of remote work and multiple return to office delays, most Google employees are heading back to the office, at least part-time. And ex-Google CEO and Chairman Eric Schmidt, and also get off my lawn, man, couldn't be happier about it. And here's his quote. It's important. I don't know why. Why is I? It's important?
It's important.
What a weird. It's important that these people be at the office, in my view. Schmidt, 66, tells CNBC Make It. Now, what does CNBC Make It? Whatever. Anyway, he tells the people who are writing this article, arguing that for decades, the in-office style has been proven effective. Quote, I'm a traditionalist.
Awesome. So that tells me he knows just the in-office style. He doesn't know any alternatives.
Yeah, but hang on. Let me finish here. Starting Monday, Google's hybrid work arrangement kicked off with most employees most. What does that mean? With most employees expected to be in the office at least 3 days per week. Schmidt, who served as Google's CEO from 2001 to 2011, so he worked there for 10 years, helped transform the then young Silicon Valley startup to the global tech behemoth that they are today, and credits in-office work for much of that growth. We'll stop right there.
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? First of all, that's an interesting...
Being in the office is the only thing that did that?
And he worked there from 2001 to 2011.
Had nothing to do with the founders still being at the company, being active?
No other variables coming into play.
Had nothing to do with top talent, had nothing to do with being in Silicon Valley, had nothing to do with any of that.
Exactly.
The fact that there were butts in seats, utilization was at peak capacity, The Gantt chart, everything was back to back on the Gantt chart with no gaps.
Absolutely. That's
what did it,
That's exactly right. Oh, my goodness.
Me.
So one of the things I do know about from the model before the pandemic is Google, and they're not the only ones. There are some others, large offshore companies. They have these campuses in various locations. And basically all of the facilities a human may need are provided there on the company.
Sure.
The idea being you shall never have to leave the campus. Yeah. Right? You want your dry cleaning done, you don't have to go drop off your clothes. There's a dry cleaning facility on campus.
I like that.
I like it too. But from an organizational perspective, it is geared toward keeping that person busy working. Right? As opposed to being distracted. And this extends out to even off time, meaning at the end of the business day, their work day, they're going home, Silicon Valley, rife with traffic, all of that good stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's non-productive if somebody has to drive home and it might take them 45 minutes, hour, 2, whatever, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, is, housing being expensive in that area.
Sure.
So people live further away, therefore exacerbating the problem. Their commute's even longer.
Right.
So Google will have in the past, put on these luxury buses that bus people from some locations further out from the campus into the campus and back. Of course, these buses have high-speed Wi-Fi available.
Of course, yeah.
So one is supposed to leave work, fold down your laptop, get onto the bus, open your game, and start coding. That's all good. So, or not, right? But the point is this. The point is about the article. When he says that he doesn't know how you build a good management culture without being in the office, and this has been the best way so far, has it really worked as well for all of the companies? I mean, or even Google for that matter.
I don't know. I'm gonna, for some strange reason, I don't know why, I'm gonna side with him up until this point,
you
because I feel we haven't read enough of the article yet, because there's nothing saying that you cannot meet for important events or reasons. There's nothing in the article yet that we've encountered.
Right.
So I have to think back onto a program that I was in one time, a very large program, right? And like very large program, I think very large. It had like 7 teams. That's very large to me. 7 teams working out of one backlog is very large to me. Some people will say like, well, Brian, I've got 300 developers on my team. And I'm like, surprise, no, you don't. But it was a very large team, and planning and making sure that we had all the synergy of planning and all the activities things that you would do in big room planning. They would fly everybody in from all around the country once every, I don't remember, 6 weeks?
6 weeks, yeah.
Something like that, which is pretty frequent if you think about it, like hopping on a plane now. You know what I mean? 2 years ago, maybe it wasn't, but now every 6 weeks hopping on a plane is that's fairly frequent travels. Is that 10% travel every 6 weeks? 10% would be 10% travel would be 3 days out of every month, right?
That's about there, yeah.
Or no, 2 days out of every month. 2 days out of every month. So maybe just short of 10% travel, I think, in the job. But the leadership of that program, obviously they paid for it, right, out of their budget, and they felt very strongly that in-person planning was the way to do it. But that was only 2 days, maybe a day of travel and then 2 days in person, and a half a day of travel split up, whatever, right? But they felt very strongly that in-person planning was the best way to do planning, so much so that they would fly people in. And I respect that a lot, because there's a lot that you can do, that you can get through in planning, and that you can get through quicker in person than you can remote. And if you're going to look at the money and look at people's time and say 10% of my budget and my time, my people's time, I want to get absolute maximum dollar value or whatever, that would be the time to do it. Because in those 2 days, everyone's ultra focused. They likely, maybe, don't have their families, that the things are taken care of and stuff like that, so they can be ultra focused in those 2 days. But to your point, if you're talking about like, well, I'll just basically sneak in, put my tentacles into every aspect of these people's lives, and then they'll basically have no separation between work time and personal time, then that's a whole different affair.
I agree.
Which is what he's talking about. He's not talking about what I'm talking about.
That's right. So what you're saying is still valuable today, whether you're working remotely or you're bringing people back in person.
Yeah.
Get people together for a concentrated period of time to focus, right? Hyper focus on a given goal. Big room planning would be that. But bringing people back in, and on the premise that is a better model, and for want of not knowing any other model, that is where I have an issue.
Well, he hasn't given a reason yet. He has not given us a reason backed with anything yet. He says, He says, oh, well, the reason that over the 10 years that I was with Google from 2001 to 2011, in-office work was responsible for much of that growth. And then he also says that in-office style has been proven effective. Neither of those quotes are backed up by anything. He's not giving me a half a dozen studies across the world or whatever. Like, he's not giving me any of that. In-person work, I think face-to-face communication is in the Agile Manifesto. Although face-to-face communication is technically, if you see somebody on a screen, that's face-to-face communication. So there's wiggle room there. I'm stretching because I'm pretty sure I know they meant in person, just talk to people, that kind of stuff. there's a whole bunch of context there, because I'm sure when they wrote the Agile Manifesto, they were probably thinking along the lines of like, no, you don't want to do it through emails. No, you don't want to do it through whatever channels. You just want to get together and just talk to someone and just get it out of the way and get it done. And there's no mistakes about communication, less mistakes about communication. And
I'm pretty sure that's right. I mean, back when they wrote the manifesto, we didn't have the kind of telepresence tools that we have today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to hear from those guys on, the founders on this particular topic, because we've moved on a whole bunch in the, whatever is it, 25 years, whatever it is, right, since it was written. And to that end also, right, there's telecommunications, there's telepresence. The two are widely different. Most companies that were using telecommunications before would side with Mr. Schmidt and say, yeah, it's not the same. I can't really see if someone's paying attention, right? That's valid. But today in 2022, I would wager that most companies aren't using just telecommunications. They're using telepresence. Yeah. Some sort of tools where you can actually see the individuals, right? Interact with them.
I know we're straying now from the point in the article, but like as a corporation, as a company, like where are you going to be in 100 years? Like you want both. This is like the wave of globalization. Globalization continues, let's say, for example. You can't both take advantage of offshoring entire departments, but also expect everyone to work out of your corporate office. What do you want? You can't have both things. So you're telling me that I want top talent to work in my company, but only if they live within 20 square miles or whatever, 30 square miles of the, like, that seems, for companies that are super invested in globalization to drive down the cost of their labor, their practices and what they're saying seem very at odds with each other.
Yeah, they're diametrically opposed. I mean, even before the pandemic, you had, medium to large companies taking advantage of the offshoring model that you mentioned, and people were not in the same room. Yeah. Right? We already had that. The difference now is that we've been forced to not go in the office for 2 years almost, right? Because of the pandemic. And there's been a plethora of tools that were invented as a result, right? Through the necessity, I guess. But now we're in a different spot. Now we're in a spot where, as I say, we use telepresence and we can use it to have almost the same impact. Not quite the same, but almost the same, right? As you would. And when I say not quite, I don't mean during that 1 hour, 2 hour meeting duration. I mean outside of that, the water cooler conversations, right? If people are flying in, you can meet outside of work for social reasons and bond. All of that is missing still, right? And that's valuable. I'm not knocking that. But I'm just saying that by Schmidt saying in the old model of just bringing people into the office, I remember a lot of times people were clock watchers, basically. They were in the office and they couldn't wait till 5 o'clock.
Yeah. Well, that's so let's come back to his article. So we said he credits in-office work for much of Google's growth, which I gotta admit, that's a real stretch. Yeah. We spent decades having these conversations about people being close together. The discussion at the coffee table. The discussion at the coffee table and going to coffee, Schmidt says. Remember all of that? Was that all wrong? All right, he's like, I'm really starting to worry about his health at this point. Schmidt says it's not just a matter of nostalgia. There are practicalities to working together in person. For example, he says, conversations about professionalism, which might be particularly necessary at companies full of young employees, are much harder to have virtually.
I just have no idea where he's going with this. Is he saying that young people have to be in person in order for us to speak about professionalism with them?
I don't know. Here, let me read the next. When Schmidt started at Google, for example, the company had, quote, an awful lot of college students who were behaving as though the workplace was like college. He says, quote, and I used to say to them, this is not a college. This is a professional thing. You can't do that. And or it might be illegal. Please stop now. I'm going to drive through. Younger employees, particularly those between the ages of 25 and 35, can also use in-office settings to more effectively develop their management styles, Schmidt says. For him, that includes learning about meeting etiquette, presenting skills, workplace politics, dealing with competitors both internally and externally. I need to stop now because he's really losing me in the rambling that's going on in this article. Or maybe it's a larger conversation taken out of context and pieced together back into an article to sell clickbait or whatever. But I don't really understand. employees between the ages of 25 and 35, which is a huge age range as far as being a professional, number one. But number two, meeting etiquette, presenting skill, workplace politics, competitors, and management. Everything I just named, it's more difficult to get a handle on when you do it remotely. And if you master doing it remotely, you'll easily master doing it in person. So I don't understand if he's he seems to be against developing those skills that way and saying it's easier to develop those skills in the office. But I think it doesn't matter if you're remote or in person. Those skills are hard to develop anyway. Like, they're more about the people that are mentoring you in the workplace and the people that are kind of giving you feedback in the workplace, remote or not remote.
I agree with you. Also, he seems to have a certain disdain for the younger employees, that they come out of college and they treat a workplace like a college. I don't know if that's true, honestly.
Yeah, but like 25 to 35 is like an odd age range. I'm like, I don't think of 35-year-olds as like these youngsters with their MTV music. Like, they're 35, dude. They got houses and children and mortgages and insurance and stuff. Like, what?
They've outgrown their college years by then.
35.
One would hope, right? So I don't know where he's coming from on that one.
In terms of their age, that's what they learn. If you miss out on that because you're sitting at home on the sofa while you're working, he's sitting at home on the sofa, while working. Like, I like how those two are separate. There's no way you could crack a critical defect in production sitting on the sofa. There's no way you can come up with a critical idea sitting on the sofa. Like, this man obviously has never met anyone who does creative writing and or anything along the lines of
knowledge work.
Yeah, knowledge work. There are exceptions, Schmidt notes. Some workers might have specialized roles that don't require a lot of in-person communication. Others don't require a lot of in-person communication.
Wow, like the stapler guy in Office Space.
Others might deeply dislike the office's social nature, and many probably aren't looking forward to reintegrating a lengthy commute into their schedules.
He's got that right.
Yeah, you think so? You're probably living in the right state for that. Still, Schmidt says a large-scale movement to permanently work remotely would deny at least 30 to 40 years of workplace experience.
Whoa.
I think there's a lot of evidence that humans are social, he says, which has nothing to do with this article.
No.
And that the current virtual tools are not the same as the informal networks that occur within a corporation.
Let's unpack that
Let me pause for a second. Okay. I think if anything in this article that we all agree with, I think there's a lot of evidence that humans are social. Like, well, thanks for letting me know that. Like,
right. All those anthropologists weren't wrong after all. Okay.
And that the current virtual tools are not the same as the informal network that occur within a corporation. Now, if I'm going to take his quote, I'm going to say the current virtual tools do not mimic the in-office setting. Not about corporation, because there are corporations that are 100% remote, entire organizations. So what are you going to say as the CEO of that? Like, well, they're not successful. Like, that would be probably his critique. Right. To 100% remote organizations. Meanwhile, Google has been 100% remote for a couple of years now, 18 months, 2 years now.
And they may never go back to fully in person.
Yeah, and they're still not going back to 100% in person.
And they're not the only ones.
Yeah, well, because they don't want to deal with the revolt that would come with it. But I mean, he worked there in a very different era.
He did.
He worked there at the end of the .com bust up until the mid 20. Well, I guess until 2011.
So, yeah. But that was 2008, 9. We came out of a recession, started to build back up again. 2011. I can see why he would be thinking in that way, that great management is only built by people being in person. I'm wondering, and he doesn't say this in his article, so I want to be clear about that, but I'm wondering if his own management style was one of, like, if I can't see you, I don't know if you're working. Because that's what we saw at the early phases of the pandemic, too. People were saying, well, if you're remote, I don't know if you're working. I want to check your hours. I want to see your face online, kind of thing. That didn't last long, but there were a few companies that fell into that trap. So I don't know what his own stance would have been.
Obviously, this article is very clickbaity. Like that's the kind of the whole purpose of this article, to enrage people to click on it. And success, congratulations, author of the article.
It worked.
It worked. Like you got me to click on it and get enraged enough to be like, what is this nonsense? Like it doesn't help me at all. That some person who's basically been out of a job for over 10 years, ex-CEO who's been out of a job for 10 years, is railing against the current way that the company is operating. He doesn't like it. Doesn't understand it, doesn't like it. Get off my lawn. The arguing point here, the legitimate take here would be, but people are more efficient in person together. More efficient and more effective in person together. Again, I'm saying that without any kind of backup or evidence.
Yeah, so I think both sides of it, right? So when he says he's a traditionalist, to me that sounds like he's, dare I say, a little close-minded.
Right, yeah.
I think one should be open to looking at the latest data we have out there with the tools in place. I mean, we have so many companies now that not only are remote, have been for a while, but have pledged to never go back to be in person fully. That's some rules require you to have in-person presence at the office. There's no doubt, right? If you're in sales or marketing or whatever. Okay, there's no doubt about that. That's a hybrid model, which is exactly what Google purportedly is adopting. So, when they say most, it doesn't mean all, right? So, when you look at the scale of somebody like Google, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
But they're a big player. You look at all these other companies that have gone remote, and then they swear they're never going back to the in-person model. Not only because the employees don't want to face that, the dreaded commutes, but it's also good for the company. I know plenty that have downsized their physical footprint in the office because they don't need the space.
Yeah, right.
So it's good for the company too.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it that way, well, obviously, when you look at it from the perspective of I will not be able to own these people's lives 24/7 anymore, like I did 10 years ago, I guess it seems like a terror at that point.
And a select few have gone the other extreme too. They've said, we're remote, we'll let people work where they want, when they want. So there's no longer the expectation that you will be there online during quote unquote business hours, because the notion of business hours is diluted now. Your company is East Coast and you're living anywhere, right? You could work from Europe for your company.
Yeah, that was the point that I was trying to poorly bring up earlier. If the labor market for your company is global and you're willing to recruit anyone, again, local laws or whatever aside, if you're willing to recruit the best people and you're willing to scour the whole planet to find the best people, you're going to need something in place to basically say like time zones and remote collaboration and working and shared documents and all, to figure out how, planning events, all that kind of stuff, to figure out how all that works. Now that you've kind of cobbled all these people together that are the quote best from all across the world, basically you are going to smash the traditional concept of business hours. Like 9 to 5 is the first thing that's going to go out of the window when I got the best test engineers out of India. I got the best software engineers out of Silicon Valley, and I got the best product people out of the East Coast or whatever, Sweden, England, whatever, wherever you're going. How are you going to build a team that,
I agree fully. I think Dolly Parton's going to have to record another song now. Working 9 to 5 is now so 1980s? I don't know. I forget when she recorded it. But anyway, I think
1981. I think.
So I think now going forward, what would be interesting is over the next 2-3 years, it'll be interesting to look at some data points to say those companies that said they would never go back fully in person, how are they faring? And those companies like Mr. Schmidt's, although Google's not his, but right, how are they faring?
Yeah.
And see how effective they've been. I'm avoiding the word efficient because it's hard. You don't want to measure the efficiency so much in this scenario specifically. It's how effective are they being. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean,
I can only see the tools getting better and better.
That's where I thought when I first read the article. When I first read the article, I thought that that's where he was going to go, which is a critique of the tools available. And at the point where you're an ex-Google CEO and you're critiquing software tools that are available to extend the capabilities of your software team, I mean, there's some glass houses and there's some stones being thrown. You know what I mean? Like, shouldn't you be leading the way? Shouldn't your, if he, I don't know if he still sits on the board of Google, but shouldn't you be pushing to say like, hey, we should be figuring out how to make remote effective, or even to his point, as efficient as in person. Now, some of that stuff, I dare to say that you may never bridge that gap. But planning, for example, in my program, like they had to bring everyone in for planning, but they only brought people in for planning. They didn't bring people in for the sprint review. They didn't bring people in for retrospectives even. Like it would have, like if I probably could have done it, it would have been bring people in, and the first day, or at least the first half of the day, probably. First half of the day would have been retrospective. Close the sprint, get it done, and then break for lunch, and then come back from lunch, and boom, you jump right into planning. Although it does make a lot of sense to that. As soon as you get there, first day, first thing, boom, you jump right into planning. Like, this is a vision, this is what we're trying to do, this is a goal. That does make sense. But I don't know, maybe maybe we can nitpick that. But in that program, they did all the planning, and that was the only thing they did in person. Then everyone went back, and everything else was done separately, sprint over sprint over sprint. And then they bring people in when they did the big planning, and they fly everybody in. Right. And it was really a good way of doing things for that program. I don't know if that translates to everyone else, but maybe a quarterly planning, maybe a much smaller company. That was a huge program. Maybe a smaller company would only need to do that on a quarterly basis, twice a year. I don't know what I was like. If I was an executive, I don't know what I would start with. I definitely, if I was an executive and I had my own budget and I was willing to pay for the time and the people, the presence of people's time, I would definitely be willing to pay at least quarterly to fly everyone in to do, if not planning, some sort of adjustment with regard to bringing everybody on the same page with regard to vision and the direction of the company and that kind of stuff.
I think it's extremely valuable. While you're doing that, as people are actually physically together, meeting one another, it fosters that sense of camaraderie, I guess, and earning trust with one another. I think there's multiple benefits to that, right? Which some companies were already doing in the past. So if they did it today, it's nothing that new in terms of what it costs them. But employees are coming into those meetings knowing that this is the only time they're required to come in, right? The rest of the time, their commute's really short. Just go up and down the stairs maybe or whatever. So I think you have an improvement in morale, perhaps, right? In motivation. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. By letting people not have to suffer through the daily commute.
That's why I'm saying when you do like a planning and you bring people in or fly people in, or I guess people have to drive in if they're local, at least it's a special thing, and it's not very often. And kind of the reason I go here is, especially if you have full-time remote employees, you have to pay for them to come in. So it's like there's a budgetary aspect of it. So basically it's you as the manager, whatever, managing person, making the decision that I'm going to spend money on my people gathering because I have a reason for it. Not just like, hey, I want you in the office 3 days out of every week. You pick the day and just check the box that you showed up and your butt was in your seat. Like what?
Right. That serves no purpose
point?
whatsoever.
But what's the point?
I agree. When
Why
you're bringing
three?
them in
Why 3 days?
I know. When you're bringing people in for planning, you can treat that as an event that people get together and celebrate successes or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, retrospective to your point, right? You improve together and start to earn that trust and deepen the trust that's already there. I think for that reason, it's good to do that. So we're not arguing against in person. We're not saying never, right? What we're saying is judiciously done, it can be very effective. But arbitrarily done 3 days, 2 days a week, just because, that's meaningless.
That's like some dictate from somebody up in management. Or when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, is this a person who is also paying the rent and utilities for the building that's sitting idle?
That?
Is that person involved in this decision? Because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like that person is like, why am I paying for all these facilities if there's nobody here?
Right. So let's bring people in so we can justify the expense.
Got to bring people in. I don't know, man. If your facility was so great, wouldn't people be coming to it to use it?
Exactly.
Just saying.
Right.
I feel like just ending the podcast right there. What is this?
How good is your facility? Maybe that should be our parting.
Yeah, how good is your facility? I mean, but really, like, how good is it? I mean, listen, if it's not on par with my home office, you're already starting a losing battle. Do you have a nice desk that goes up and down? You have a nice chair that I can sit in all day without any kind of pain or whatever? You know what I mean? Right. Do I have an external keyboard that has some key travel that I actually can feel what I'm doing? And do I got nice big monitors, extra monitors, that go up and down? I can move them around or whatever, and they have all the right connections and cables. And
I don't have to bring my big ball of cables. Yeah.
Or do I got to come with a giant rolling bag, big 40-pound rolling bag every time I come and unpack like I'm camping for the day? Every time I come to your office, do I have to fight for space?
Right.
So I guess this is our summary. We're going to the summary territory now. 45 minutes. So I guess at a certain point, I realized that the article is clickbaity. That's kind of the main point of the article. But I also think, I'm not immune to what I see on LinkedIn, where people are out there saying like, "Oh, you got to get back to the office." People are gonna get back to the office. I see people shilling for companies, being like, you gotta get back in the office for varying reasons. Right, they all have varying reasons. They're probably not great. They probably go back to because my budget is if I don't use the facility or whatever.
For me though, if you're a traditionalist, you really need to look at the business landscape today, as it stands today, and say, does it work or do I need to adapt?
Yeah.
Right. And you just stay as you were because you're a quote unquote traditionalist. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, the times have moved on. You've got to move with it.
But the other thing about this article, where he should have gone, I started talking about this and I kind of abandoned it. Where he should have went is he should have talked about what do the tools need to do in order to give you the same experience. What do they need to do? And if his answer is like, oh, you could never build me another tool, you can't do anything. That's not helpful.
Right.
As a CEO, I would never accept that as a response. How can we solve this problem? Well, you can never solve that problem.
Right.
Get out of my office. You're not even trying it. You're fired. Get out of here.
Yeah, so say that you solve it or your successor will.
So, that's where he should have gone with this. Is like, well, what is the special sauce about being in the same office? And if you can't figure it out, which I do have to say, there are a bunch of studies out there that do prove that working together has synergies that working remote just doesn't have. However, you probably could start by listing what are those synergies and what can we do in the software to bridge the gap in some way. Mm-hmm. We talk about this all the time about you should have a way to in Google Meets, for example. Oh, look, Google. We're talking about Google, a product that Google makes. In Google Meets, for example, you should have a way to add somebody, for example, your daily Scrum, to add them as an observer where they cannot comment and they cannot speak. They can't take themselves off mute. In fact, I wouldn't even have a problem if they can't even put themselves on camera. Sure. They're just a black box that tells you who they are, and they can't say anything.
Yeah.
Maybe they can send you instant messages or whatever on your company's messaging app or whatever. Hey, what about this? Hey, talk about this. Hey, make sure to whatever. But they could be disruptive like that anyway. But there should be some kind of tool for Scrum teams built in to the daily Scrum. The point of the daily Scrum is for only these people to talk, and for everyone else that wants to observe, we have no problem with them observing, as long as they have the discipline to only observe. So the tool should let you add somebody as a true observer.
Right.
Even though I could easily make the case on that number one, people should have some self-discipline, but also number two, your facilitator at the Scrum should be like, whoa, you're not on the team. And another outburst and you're off the meeting invite. You're out of here. Yep. Obviously your typical Scrum Master is never going to say that because they're in fear of their jobs, right?
Right.
Yeah. But my point is the tools, there are very minor things that you could tweak in the tools to catch up.
Yeah, and yes, you're right. Absolutely, I agree. They've come a long way. We've got to acknowledge that. The other thing is, I think as I said earlier, you fast forward 2 to 3 years, those tools will look not only different, radically different, because technology is going to allow us to really tap into those things that, up until now, we've not been able to do.
Yeah.
Up until now, we've been basically two-dimensional, Brady Bunch squares, we speak. But I think there's going to be more and more capability added to these collaboration tools going forward.
All right. Well, hey, let us know what you think about this clickbait article via the comments or
vote below. Let us know what other subjects you want us to explore, as we will be driven by your input.
That's true. We need new subjects to explore and new clickbait articles to rail against, to argue for. I don't really feel that I presented Eric Schmidt's point very well. I totally could have gone the way of get off my lawn with your newfangled remote work and your new ways of doing things. But before we quit, I need to go check his LinkedIn, see what position he holds. I'd really like to know if he still sits on Google's board, or if he's like being kicked off the island.